So I had a debate with my stepmother the other day, and it come down to her and many average people's perceptions that there's a population of benefit claimers who don't want to work, who want to have children in order to derive an income, and this is either morally intolerable or financially unsupportable situation that leave it at that. Now, my position is that the government has a responsibility to ensure children aren't in poverty, and there's a clash of those two ideas, which is best put by the other side of the fence in the contrasting of the statement. A government has a responsibility to every child, by saying she flips the argument to me and says, so what you're saying is the government has to pay for the children you decide to have. And I think the idea is that, on the face of it, stated like this, is that it's a clear dereliction of personal responsibility that needs to be located in persons, and in that sense it's an absurdity to say something like the government has responsibility to reduce child poverty. In actual fact, it's a legal responsibility in the UK. The last Labour government passed a law and put it in law that the government has to make plans and monitor and ensure the constant reduction of child poverty. And this is in the this debate that we had is in the context of another measure of austerity, the so-called benefits cap. The idea being that sometimes it would hit the news that, oh, this family makes, I don't know, 40,000, 50, 60, 80,000 pounds, I don't know, in benefits each year. Probably they don't, the headline is £80,000 on benefit. They don't look at the details, that they have a disabled child, they have a big house for some complicated reason, and they're getting, it's the rent for the big house, and they're not getting anything beyond the average person's entitlement. It's just the shock factor of the number to sell the message that scroungers exist who don't want to work, who want to have lots of children in order to generate an income for themselves. Now, I must confess, I found it difficult, and that's where the debate kind of stopped before we ended up talking about some other personal things, and it naturally subsided. But I did try to reframe the argument from a principles point of view, insofar as trying to get agreement that we look to the principles that can be got from particular examples and let those principles inform our policy and such like. But it was just again and again reiterated. So you're saying the government has to pay for blah blah blah, and that's clearly absurd. That's my additional, but that's the implied meaning of that statement. You're saying that the government has to pay for children. Now, firstly, this repeated statement is a complete failure to deal with what I've just said about, oh right, so we have to figure out the principles and what are the principles and all this and scrutinising. And I think perhaps my stepmother's elderly and fairly uneducated, so she's she's not stupid or anything, but uneducated in the academic sense. And so perhaps these abstractions that I want to make from the concrete reality to get a handle on what the crux of the argument is. She doesn't understand it, maybe, and just knows that I'm having trouble directly meeting this point about the seeming absurdity of the government paying for you to have children. And so part of this video is to see if anybody else has an answer to that, and to also see if an answer comes to me now as I later reflect on that. With a more direct, perhaps it requires playing the game in flipping it into a concrete example. So you're saying maybe that I need to find this example which will fight the intuitive absurdity of that statement by flipping that statement on its head. And this is lacking, perhaps. The short answer is yes, that's and it isn't. If you, well, I mean, you can object to the loaded words, yeah, the framing of the question. On the flip side, is using emotional loaded words of the government's paying for, yeah. That emphasizes certain aspects like the lack of personal responsibility and the seemingly endless pit of money that might be required, and so on and so forth. So you can attack it on that front, but you find that really on the other side of the fence, you're almost as guilty as loading the words emotionally the other way. Like I would say things like, so you don't care about the children who might be going hungry, or, you know, really living at a poor standard of living. And it's not about caring, there's just not endless money and blah blah blah. And you go around in this endless loop of argumentation of counter examples. So it's not arguing from particulars and expecting to get to the end agreement. It's never going to work, and I made that point. And it's about extracting principles that are at play from particulars and testing those principles in a more abstract way to find out if your intuition is correct. And that's difficult for a lot of people, because once they find they can assume a political position with very little mental work, and the ease with which they can hold it and defend it by repeating this, they find a nice mantra that makes them sense, such as, clearly it's an absurdity to suggest the government pays for children that you have endlessly that you can't afford. So I was saying, the short answer is no, it's right. Yes, the government pay to an extent to support the children that are born by other people. Just get used to it. The question is, if you care about children and you don't want to punish the children for the I mean, this is arguable, but what can be perceived as the faults of the parents. If you believe in not punishing the children for the faults of the parents, then you understand that a benefits cap, wherein, you know, once you have up to a certain amount of children, you're not going to get any more benefits for the next child. So therefore, if they was receiving, you know, if 3 children was getting 5 loaves of bread between them a week, a 4th child is now 4 children getting 5 loaves of bread between them, and a 5th child is now 5 children getting 5 loaves of bread, and so on and so forth. And the only caring you do about it is when if it reached such extremes that there was actually malnutrition or in jeopardy of death, then you would take the children into care. And that is the consequence of this policy, and the consequence of this outlook is as absurd and abhorrent to me as, you know, the idea of paying for children is for the other side of the fence. What I said is if you told people that they couldn't have children, at least that would show you cared and you were punishing the right people, and that your policy would be somehow consistent. But the fact that you just put a penalty in, a cap in, shows you don't really care at all, and you're just blindly regulating, you know, to appease other people. You know, the voters who have this perception, and this perception is given and distorted and extended and exaggerated through the media. And my stepmother, she would talk about so many examples of, oh, such and such and such never wants work, had another baby because she didn't want work, and everybody has these stories. But whether it's fundamental truth and justice of the situation, I think is far from clear. I mean, and then so there's the loaded words aspect of this flip change, which is making it difficult. The other way of tackling the arguments, apart from this abstract way of looking to principles and building up, is to look to the inequalities and say, okay, the reason you have this perception that it's so silly to suggest the government pay is because you have the idea that the government can't afford and you can't afford, and the money's coming off you. But when you look at the inequalities in the world and you see the gross disparities, it's far from true anyhow. If the top 1% didn't have all that stash of cash and were taxed fairly, and you had an agreeable social distribution, there would be no problem. And I said, you know, children aren't just financial burdens. They become the new society, the very society you exist in. They become all the waiters, the teachers, the doctors, the engineers, the road cleaners, so on and so forth. We invest in children. I mean, some people obviously want humanity to go extinct, but that argument aside, you know, children and human existence is predicated on investing and creating and paying for future generations. If that's going to be objected to on the grounds of you personally can't afford, you're creating such a, what I would say is a travesty against the human right of procreation, which would be another, is the whole point, is that you're saying, you poor people, you can't contribute to the future generations by having children, and you can't enjoy the benefits of having children, the benefits of satisfying your personal urge to have children and offspring, and the benefits of the love and the happiness that they can bring. And that is the point. But still, it's too long of a point to meet this. So you're saying governments should pay. I guess the instant they get, if they want to phrase it like that, one way to meet it would be to say, well, they pay, yeah, governments have to pay for every child that you have, insofar as they're paying for an investment in societies, and that the people who get to contribute to the future societies shouldn't be biased in any way about income. It's not a bad retort, but I don't think it would quite demolish the intuition that is sitting behind this repeated philosophy and mentality of poor people can't have children that they can't afford. So any help would be appreciated. Toodaloo.